bit about what the agenda would be of the hour we're going to spend here. So my name again is Zishan Khan. I'm a director at Armanino, and a quick background for myself is I started out my career in PeopleSoft Consulting in the ERP solution implementation services, and after that joined PricewaterhouseCoopers as a director, and then started out my career for the controls and the Sarbanes-Oxley and the SOX world. Spent about 8-9 years there. Moved over for Oracle. Oracle, I was in the sales, doing full-time sales of the GRC solution, which is the Governance, Risk, and Compliance solution for the Oracle ERP, and just joined about less than a year to Armanino and back to my consulting roots to really talk about the solution and technologies and how that impacts the ERP in the audit world, in internal audit and external audit as well, and hence the idea of understanding for the Intacct as well. So Alex, you want to do a quick introduction for yourself as well?
Sure, thanks Zishan. My name is Alex Meyer, and I'm the Director of AX Development at Fastpath. We do security auditing and compliance across the mid-market ERP space, and one of those ERPs including is Intacct. So that's kind of where my background is.
Excellent. Thanks, Alex. Yep. So a quick agenda for the hour you're going to spend with us here is a little background about, especially we kind of tailored this towards IPO readiness, of the reason being the fact that Intacct clients and the Intacct ERP is really geared towards for mid-market clients and clients who are getting ready to go public, and we'll talk a little bit about the route to public and the road of going public, and that's what Armanino gets really specializes in. Then we'll talk a little bit about the SOX process. Like I said, I've been part and parcel of this SOX regulations since 2004, and I was there in a way of making sure how the process works and what it is, and been part of that for that long time. And then we're going to move a little bit more into the details of the native controls within Intacct, and Alex is definitely going to take over as talk about how Fastpath, the platform, is actually helping out, and also making sure that it's efficient, and how the controls really work within Fastpath, and how it can help within the overall Intacct ERP. So that's going to be our quick agenda there, and we're going to start from there. We'll be ready for questions if you have any at the end of the whole presentation, so we're more than happy and welcome to ask those, and probably even in the middle, if you have any questions, we could probably send it over to James and definitely ask them as well. So just from a perspective of IPO, and the reason we, like I said, chose to understand the whole idea of going initial public offering, of companies actually creating a value for their shareholders. It's definitely a very exciting process. You're actually creating the whole the journey there of what the end goal, the exit strategy could be. But with all those details come with a little bit of making sure that your governance is in place, your processes and controls, and definitely the technology which is set up with Intacct and Fastpath is in place as well. The keys to this whole process, and we won't go too much detail about this because it's really not about the how to go public here, but it's really just to build up the key finance team, the internal audit team, the controls teams, the process teams, the technology team. It's very important that you put together those governance and business processes, and you're actually making sure that they're clean and documented and properly done. So the key to this whole business of regulation is the documentation, and how you follow those documentations and prove it to the external auditors or internal auditors what the ideas are about your corporate controls here, and the governance and the policies that you put to place as a company. Again, the skill sets are the important success factors to this whole thing is making sure the processes are properly set and the core skill sets are there, especially for your finance team, and identify and leverage initiatives that really come in to play, especially tools like Fastpath and Intacct that you can leverage as you go through and you walk through there. So that's a quick kind of a background of where, how, and where the key items of discussions should be once you're thinking about either IPO or if you've already gone public, and how you're actually going to be managing your regulations, especially a big one like SOX here. So a lot of companies, a lot of clients of ours ask about what are the key challenges that come in, and as I kind of talked about is the companies should capitalize the favorable market conditions, which in the past couple of years have not been that favorable. A lot of companies like Uber and Airbnb and Pinterest and others have been very shy to go public, but they've been actually getting money from private investors as well, and they've actually, the market share has grown quite a bit, especially companies like Uber. But there will, I think there's a lot of conversations about waiting until the 2016 election is over and the 2017 is a place and the time to go public here. Again, with going public, there is a lot of planning that needs to be taken. Regulations, that's what we're going to talk a little bit more about. Detail of SOX is a very important aspect of that. A lot of 21 to 23% of companies, once they even go public, struggle with their regulations requirements for the SEC reporting, and that's where it says many regulations the companies struggle and when they're ready to IPO. So moving quickly and not understanding the regulatory requirements is a lot of issues that a lot of new companies really face. The good news is with the Jobs Act and the Emerging Growth Company Acts area, you get a time before you really get checked on what your company's regulatory requirements are. Especially for SOX, you get like an 18-month pass for small companies here. Real key steps from our perspective when we look at kind of advising companies going public or looking at regulatory stuff is make sure that the documentation and the financial reporting requirements are detailed and they are documented. And hence the good idea would be the fact that if as an ERP of Intacct, that's an important aspect of the reporting requirement that you are actually putting all your processes and financial management systems within a cloud-based system. But it's an important aspect of documenting. Above and beyond for that is the controls aspect, which a lot of companies really don't pay too much attention to. They're really focused on the ERP business processes. So that's an important aspect of how to really document those critical business processes outside the ERP as well, and hence the discussion with Fastpath and above and beyond controls and processes that we talk about here. Access and upgrade if necessary the finance organization. That, I mean, talking about that is just make sure that your leaders or the finance roles, the controllers, internal auditors, the CFOs, are folks who've actually gone through a public offering before, or they understand how to manage a public company in this environment, because again the regulatory environment is quite a bit in this, especially with the regulations of SOX. The burden of the documentation is just too much. So you want to make sure that that's really an important aspect of somebody who's gone through the experience there. And of course, you definitely need to look at the experiences of hiring external auditors and external consultants to help you through this process in that regard. I can't say enough about this, but make sure you develop a risk management capabilities. A lot of companies look at this and they say, well, we don't need to document our enterprise risk management. We don't need to understand that right now. We know what we're doing. We know we're focusing on growth and revenue and all that. But what really happens is, it's all, interestingly, risk is a conversation that you can have anytime, anywhere. And a lot of companies and the CEOs and the leaders of the companies are actually talking about them, but they're just not documenting them. So the important aspect of risk, and in our world that every day that I look at, is make sure that you've got the risk and you've got controls and mitigating controls around those risks that you need to do. And it could be just the growth of hyper growth of technology, or not just from a regulatory point of view, but from a hyper growth of revenue or vendors or customers or your infrastructure or hiring employees, how this, all of these policies and procedures, a lot of new companies just don't take too many advantage of that. And that I sincerely advise a lot of people to make sure that we don't need to have a full-blown enterprise risk management system, but you want to definitely make sure that you're actually talking about it and documenting it properly just to mitigate those risks here. And as we go along this conversation here, we'll talk a little bit more about manual controls and IT controls and automated controls, and hence where the idea of Fastpath comes in, and Intacct automated controls come in as well. And again, we have to understand the legal and the tax matters as well. And the most important aspect that I always tell is don't be shy to actually hire the right advisors, even if it's just for getting some guidance from them, and then doing it on your own, but definitely getting the guidance is very important. So moving into a little bit more of a SOX process. Like we talked about, SOX is nothing more than, for a lot of folks who don't know it really about it, it came around in 2004. It's Sarbanes-Oxley, the two Congress folks that really wanted to pass this law after the issues came around for Anderson and Enron situation. But the idea what they actually produce is nothing new to anybody within the accounting world or a company that they're running. The SOX is really about, you have risks, and risks, like we just talked about a minute ago, could be from HR risk, IT risk, the overall enterprise risk, the growth of revenue risk, vendor risk, any kind of risks that are there, and just making sure that they're documented, those risks, and those risks then have to be have a list of controls. And the controls could really be, and the two types of controls that we really look at is more of the manual controls, and the manual controls, when we say that, is much more the fact that it's really paper, in a sense that somebody is reviewing a bank statement or reviewing something else, and that's one as most of the controls in the Sarbanes-Oxley world are manually controlled. And the next, about 15 years of experience that I've been really pushing is to move over to the automation of these controls, because one, automated controls are a little bit more efficient, they're more documented well, and the computers don't make mistakes. So manual controls are really based on human errors, and they're prone to human errors, and that's where the two types of controls are really coming in. And once you have a system like Intacct and a platform like Fastpath, that's what you really need to move forward to, is try to make sure that most of your controls will be going to the automated route. Yes, in theory, that sounds great, but in practice, it is really difficult to do. But our advice, at least my advice always, is to make sure that you can maximize the automation of your ERP and platforms like Fastpath. The three aspects of the SOX process that I talk about is the readiness, when I say, is documenting your risk and control matrices. Make sure that your processes are matching of what actually is happening, the documentation of the processes actually happening in your company, because there are a lot of changes that may be happening, and you'd be actually, as you grow very quickly, your processes around the company change. Could be, like I said, the hiring process, the revenue process, the tax process, whatever it may be. But that's important that you actually document those processes all around, and that's what the readiness aspect of SOX setup is. And when we say process flowcharts and narratives, it's really just a little bit more detail of what is really happening within your company. So as you can see, SOX is starting out to be nothing more than the documentation of what really is going around your company, and based on the risks that you may have, the controls that you put in place, and the policies and procedures that you already have within the company environment. And again, as you can imagine, this is happening outside Intacct. That's nothing to do with Intacct right now. Just to upgrade on talking about the next step of management assertion, it's really about making sure that management comes around and says and tests those controls that you've actually just put in place in the readiness phase. and says, yes, these controls have been working, and this is how it's the results are, and we make sure we are very satisfied with what our controls and put in place to find any kind of either fraud or error or anything else. And most of these controls are really focused on, especially from a Sarbanes-Oxley, on the financial controls and the financial assertions that you have around your financial business processes. So, and there's a 302 disclosure of controls is basically what that really says is CFO and the CEO have to sign off every quarter that we don't have, our controls are working and implemented properly in this regard. So that's the important aspect of what the Sarbanes-Oxley law that really came around. One was document your controls and risks that you have, document the processes you have, and then the management actually comes and tests them, and the CFO and the CEO sign off every quarter before they actually go on the quarterly public reporting that we are working properly. And then the third piece of this, of course, as you get into it, is the external auditors have to come in and then do an effective testing, and that testing could be in a lot of ways, could be manual testing if there are manual controls, and the automated controls testing becomes a little bit easier because you're relying on the tools like Fastpath and the tools like Intacct as your environment. An example could just be in an Intacct environment, a three-way matching configuration setting is an automated control that could be called out to a specific risk that you have identified within the P2P process. So that's kind of an example. Could be a threshold of saying that a vendor cannot write, you cannot pay vendor X amount of dollars before you do a background check for their credit and things like that. So it could be $1,000, $10,000. So those automations and configurations are within the system of Intacct, and you want to take advantage of those automated controls to the risk that you're identifying. So that's the idea that I've been really kind of pushing forward to, is what is the automated controls and manual controls aspect there. So that's the overall environment of how the SOX process works. Again, like I was leading up to this idea, is a lot of people, a lot of companies definitely implement a very good system like an Intacct system of an ERP, but they don't really fully utilize the full functionality for the Sarbanes-Oxley world or the automation of controls world. They still rely on manual processes or manual controls and don't really start trusting the system of an Intacct there. There's definitely what I've seen in my 14 years of experience in the internal audit world and the finance world, is there's a disconnect of not actually relying on the automation of the ERP itself. And I feel that that's something, an important mistake that a lot of companies do make. And because of the fact that there's a lot of more efficiencies and a lot more reliance on a technological system rather than a manual and a human system that we have in place today in a lot of companies there. Again, I think I alluded to this fact that one of those things could be the fact the PO receivers here, you've got this, the details coming out of this. The sales invoice has these automations there as well, and the approval and the things that I talked about from a purchaser approval and all those. So all of these histories and details are inherent in an ERP like Intacct, and these definitely of these things should be taken advantage of, and make sure that you're documenting these in your control environment for regulations like Sarbanes-Oxley here. Again, the hypothetical question that really comes in it, which would you rather do, that review all reports and configurations, or just make sure that you rely on your system, and in that regard. So that's an important aspect of what I sincerely think that's an important aspect of what needs to be done in automation and documentation of controls. Audit logs, there are inherent, these are the inherently coming out, and this is in Intacct, it's already there, and make sure that you take advantage of these, like I said, I'm calling them automated controls, and these are logs or details coming out from an ERP. So this is an important aspect of what you can actually do as well. Again, I think Alex is going to talk a little bit more about this in detail of how that can be done in Intacct, and of course with the use of Fastpath as well. Kind of, this is a little bit talking about, again, relying on audit trails and where the data is residing and what the changes that are being made in ERP, or you actually apply manual controls there in the frequency of looking at the reports and what the proper ownerships and the frequency of other issues are and things like that. So again, a little bit more detail about how the audit log trails can be used within an ERP system like Intacct. Another most important aspect, which a lot of ERPs don't have inherently in them, is segregation of duty or separation of duty analysis. Just to give a quick update, is basically access and security is an important aspect of and automated controls, because if the folks want to start relying on the ERP system and the configuration of the system, you want to make sure that you have clear understanding of the folks who have the right access to do the right transactions within the system, and hence the idea of segregation of duty and security. So security is one aspect, like the access is one aspect of automated controls, but segregation of duty is a deeper one step further that needs to be done, and because of the fact is that one person can give an access of the functional assessment, and there's the functionality, and then there's a user, and there's a role itself, and a lot of small companies, because you may actually come out and say, well, we only have 5 people in our organization and we need to make sure that everybody's doing the work, so you don't want to make it undue process for them to actually have full segregation of duty. But then again, that's exactly what we start talking about, is we talk about what the risks are, identify the risks or conflicts that you have, and then put in the segregation of duty controls whatever you can, and the next step is have mitigating controls, which could be manual controls around the organization and the finance as well. But again, if you don't understand the risk and the conflicts, you may not understand what the mitigating control could be, or what could be the segregation of duty cause that is happening. So just from an analysis point of view, that what we're talking about here is you do a functional assessment, what could do the system can do, which is within the ERP like Intacct, what the conflicts are, and make sure that what those conflict reports are. Conflict 1 could be that I have an access to writing checks within ERP like an Intacct, and I can also create vendors. So that's a key common conflict that you want to avoid, that both those functionalities are not given to one person. And you may say, well, we have to, and you may have some sort of a mitigating controls around that every transaction that happens by Zishan Khan, given the opportunity to do these things, is checked by a CFO, or make sure that those items are really taken care of in that regard. So that's the idea of segregation of duty analysis. A lot of companies really miss that out, and it's a big ticket item for companies like PricewaterhouseCoopers and other folks here, that we want to make sure that the external audit really takes this as an important thing once you start getting in external audit world and Sarbanes-Oxley world as well. I won't go too much in detail about how this would be done, because I want to make sure that we're giving enough time for Alex to talk about from the Intacct point of view as well, rather than just talk about from the overall hypothetical and theoretical point of views. So the key takeaway from my perspective is that Intacct has native controls within it, but it's lacking some controls testing, which, as you saw, there could be manual controls, automated controls, which need to be done around the system like an ERP, and that's hence the idea of Fastpath and making sure that this, especially like segregation of duty, which is a key component of a lot of automated controls, is taken care of from a tool and a platform like Fastpath. So Alex, you want to take it over from explaining a little bit more about how to use Fastpath platform and enhancing the controls for SOX and everything?
Yeah, thanks, Zishan. I guess first we'll start off basically showing what native controls exist within Intacct, and then we'll move on to show where Fastpath can help facilitate speeding that the reporting side up from there. So Starting off, Intacct is kind of unique in that when you're setting up the initial Intacct environment, you have the option to use one of two different security models. You can do user-based security or role-based security, and basically the difference between the two is in user-based security, the user is assigned directly to the activity list or report permission within Intacct, and then when role-based security, the user is assigned to a role, and that role is assigned to the activity list report permission within Intacct. So it's just an extra layer of assigning that goes on there. So that's the main difference between the two security models. I will say that you can move from a user-based security model to a role-based, but you cannot move from a role-based to a user-based. So once you make, if you do switch over from your user-based to role-based, that's the final state of that. So we continue on, stay Sean. So as I mentioned, there's two different security models, and then there are 5 different user types. And user types within Intacct basically designate what a user could have access to, not what they do have access to, but what they could be assigned. And so when we're looking at the user types, the business type has unlimited access rights, so it can be assigned to any rights in the system. It can also be given administrator privileges. The employee access, or the employee user type, has the ability to view dashboard reports and other data, plus some limited other features and functionality. The project manager type includes all the rights in the employee user, plus some other access and features. The platform user, again, includes all of the rights to the employee user, plus full access to any custom applications added through platform services. And then the CRM user is a Salesforce-only user and has no Intacct access. So those are the 5 user types that you can designate that a user is when you're setting a user up inside of Intacct. As far as admin privileges, these can only be assigned to the business type user, but there are 3 different types of admin privileges. You have the full admin type, which gives you access to the full access to the administrative permissions and can create other full administrators. The limited admin, which also has full rights to the administrative privileges, but cannot create other admins, and then off, which means that the user has no administrative rights. Along with that, we also have user groups, which are basically just a group of users, but you can assign roles to that user group, and then every user in that group is automatically assigned these roles and permissions. So for an example, you could have an AP clerk user group with all of the roles that the AP clerk would need, and you can assign users to that group, and everybody in that group would get that necessary access there. If we move on to security reporting, there are limited number of security reports out of the box from Intacct. Most of the reports can be found from the user page. So if you go to company users, that's where all these reports are being pulled from. The first report we're looking at here is a user permissions report. So basically this distills down all of the rights that a user is assigned based on their roles or the permissions that they're assigned directly. If you're using the user-based security, but it's looking at all of the roles that the user is assigned and basically breaking that down. So you'll be able to see the activity list and report permission that they're assigned, and then what's permissions within Intacct for each of those activity list or reports objects that they're assigned. You can see the permissions that they're assigned as well. So you can look at the user permission report. There's also the roles report. If we go to the next screen, you'll be able to see the roles that the user is assigned. So for example, you can see that this user is assigned AP clerk and AR clerk role, as well as their manager role there. So you'll be able to see the roles that each user is assigned. And finally, you can see the user groups as well. So if the user is assigned to any user group, you'll be able to see that reporting around there as well. So those are the 3 main reports that you're going to be able to get about the user itself from within Intacct, showing you kind of where users have access and how they're getting that access. If we look at strictly login security, Intacct offers two different methods or two different features that you can implement for improving your login security. They do offer two-factor authentication, which basically means that along with the password, you need to know you would have to have some other form of validation to prove who you are. So that just adds an extra layer of security when you're logging in. It also offers inbound SSL, so you can authenticate to another application and have that authentication actually get you into Intacct. So as long as that third-party authentication uses SAML 2.0, you can set that up and use that as well to help improve your security there. We're looking at administrative access within Intacct. Intacct, again, is a little bit unique in that it doesn't have a true administrator role. You can't go in and just assign somebody an admin. To basically get a full administrative rights, what you need to do is assign the user a business type of business, a user type of business, and then the admin privileges rights of full, and then go in and assign them roles that have access to what the admin would need access to. So that's basically the way that you would create an admin user in that case. Moving on to segregation of duties. So as Zayshawn kind of mentioned previously, Intacct doesn't have the standard functionality for segregation duties out of the box. So with that being the case, you could obviously still go about reporting on segregation of duties, but it's a very manual process of setting that up. So the first step obviously is to build a rule set for your risk profile. And basically what that means is you would have to go in and decide what objects in Intacct would be a part of your rule set based on your, what you consider to be high risk for your environment. So you're looking at either taking a single permission or groups of permissions, group those together into functional business processes, and then saying, if somebody can create a vendor, we actually don't want them to be able to pay that vendor, right? So you'd have to come up with all of those different rules that you would have to come up with yourself, and then designate a severity to each of those rules as you go through. Also, when you're coming up and developing say your rule set for your segregation of duties, you want to balance your preventative controls with productivity. So Zayshawn kind of alluded to this earlier, but you want to make sure that you aren't affecting the productivity of your end users by locking down the system too much, but you also don't want to grant them more access than what they need and have them be able to do things they're not supposed to in your environment. So you want to make sure you're balancing those two when going through and developing your rule set. There's basically two ways to pull the data that you would need to do a segregation of duties analysis. You can pull the data through the user interface itself. All of the data that you would need is there, but pulling that data is very slow and tedious, and you would have to make sure that you're getting the most up-to-date data that you can get. So you definitely can do it that way, but it is going to be a slower process. Or you can export reports via web services and expedite that process a little bit, but that is going to require an Intacct developer of some kind or a third-party product to do that. So if we go on here and we look at audit trails, Intacct does provide audit trails out of the box for a record, so you can go to an individual record and go to more actions and view audit trail for the record. The information that it shows for the changes that have occurred to that record, you're going to be able to see the date that the change occurred, the action, either create, modified, or deleted, completed by, who made the change itself, and then the source of that change through user interface or API application. The one thing that I will say that is missing from the audit trail itself is that you cannot see the before and after values. So you can't see if somebody updated, an address for a vendor. You won't be able to see the values that they used. You will able to see that the change occurred, but you don't have any of those other values there. So that's just something to keep in mind. If we staying on the audit trail, if we look at user permission change tracking, this is a canned out-of-the-box report from Intacct where you can actually see the changes to user security in Intacct itself. So you'll be able to see the user that the change occurred on, the object that they've been granted access to or revoked to, the access type, so insert, add, edit, delete, list, whatever the policy is, the time it was performed, the application that the access was granted in, and then who actually made the change. So it's a pretty comprehensive user permission change report, basically showing you, where changes to user security is happening in that case. So this is a report that I created using the out-of-the-box reporting functionality. So you can actually go and make this same report yourself. So that's one of the reports that I would probably recommend either making or so you can see the changes that are being made there. Another kind of audit trail report that we've been looking at is the access log. This is actually showing where users are or how users are accessing Intacct. So you're going to be able to see user ID, the login time, the login result, whether they successfully logged in or not, the log out time, the activity, so you can see how long the duration they were logged in. The logout type will show whether or not they were logged out for inactivity or if they actually went out and hit the logout button. And then the source IP as well, so you can actually see where they're logging in from. And one other thing that Intacct allows is that you can set IP restrictions for logging in. So if a user or your user should only be logging into Intacct from within your company's IP range, you can actually set that up so it'll block any requests coming from outside that range. So that's just something else that you can set up and allow for that. One other option you can do as far as one of those mitigating controls that we were talking about earlier for segregation of duties is providing a workflow. And a workflow basically just shows what a record, the process of a record as it moves through the system, and what steps it's going to take while it's moving through there. So the workflow feature, you have to be installed for each application where you let the workflow to be in. A workflow determines the types of transactions the user can create, the path that the users can take in transaction lifestyle. For example, a workflow might allow you to create a sales quote, which can be converted to a sales order. So it's guiding you through that process and allowing, basically restricts, what's the next step that this record can take in your system. There are two different types of workflows, standard and advanced. And I normally say at this point that, I'm not a workflow expert by any means. There's a number of tutorials and workshops you can go to around creating and doing workflows that Intacct or its partners put on, and I would highly recommend, if you have questions about that, to reach out to them for that aspect. So, but workflow is definitely something you can use as a mitigating control for a segregation of duty conflict. So I just wanted to make sure you knew that that was out there. And so with all of those pieces, when we're looking at surviving the audit, and Zayshawn kind of touched on some of these points earlier, but just to go over them again, you want to be proactive. You don't want to wait till the night before your external auditors show up to start trying to throw together, what they would be looking for with an audit. And one of those proactive approaches is you want to define your corporate risk. You want to have your rule set, defined early in the process, and you want to be able to, use that as a backbone to kind of drive, what reports, where the security issues or high-risk areas that you're looking at are going to be. You want to design reports and reviews, so you want to be able to build that repeatable process that you can run very easily, because the easier you can make that process, the more likely it is that it will be executed on a periodic basis, and it's not going to be left off to the night before your audit. Provide evidence. You want to be able to show your auditors that not only, do you have these mitigating controls, but that those mitigating controls are, really mitigating the conflict itself. So you want to be able to not only provide evidence that you are mitigating the control, but you want to make sure that you're also have the documents necessary to show how that control is mitigating that conflict. And finally, the two biggest questions that an auditor is going to ask you is, who has excess and what are they doing with that excess? So you want to be able to make sure that you have the reports, documentation to show, those two basic questions going into an audit. So whatever you have to do to be able to provide those is what we're kind of looking for. And if we're looking, I like to go through and just, some tips and tricks going forward. If you are setting up security and going back in and looking to, redo your security, there are some things that I like to point out. If you do have service accounts within Intacct that are only used for API calls, only used for web services, there is an option on the user page to set that account as web services only. And basically what that does is makes it so that that account can only log in through, or can only access Intacct through a web call and can't be logged in through the UI. So even if somebody has username and password and they try to go log in as that service account through the normal Intacct login page, they're going to be stopped. So it's just an extra piece of security that you can implement to stop those fraudulent activity there. And one other thing that's very nice and kind of also unique to Intacct is that it has the option to try a roll out. So basically when you're setting up security and you want to be able to see what a role actually has access to do, you can go and actually try to roll out, and it's going to mimic basically as if you had logged in with that role. So you don't have to create a dummy user and assign it that role and log in as that user. You can actually just try a roll out, see what it looks like, see if it's going to work for you, and it just saves a little bit of time there. So just two little things to help when setting up security or redoing your security going forward. And with that, we'll go through a quick demo of how Fastpath can kind of looking at some of the challenges that Intacct provides when doing those reporting. We can kind of show what it would look like if you, what streamlined processes that Fastpath can provide to help with that. So, James, I don't know if you want to switch over.
Yeah.
All right.
There we go.
Yep. All right. I think we should be good there. So, just to give a little background for those that don't know, Fastpath, kind of like I mentioned at the beginning, we provide security auditing and compliance software for ERP systems. The tool that we're using today here for Intacct is our Assure product. It's an online SaaS-based application. We go in and hook into your Intacct environment over web services. And basically what we're looking at is pulling out user access data so we can see where users have access in your environment, and we're going to be reporting on it from this platform. So the first report that we normally run when looking at this is just a user access report. So if we go ahead and run this report here, you'll be able to see that we're bringing back results, and what this is actually saying is that this user here has access to the accounts object at a list level within this company. So and we're looking at across all users in your Intacct environment. So instead of going in and running those reports one by one from within Intacct and exporting them and collating them, we can pull that data back and run that report right away there, and you'll be able to see that data very, very quickly. Over here on the right-hand side, you're able to see how the user is actually getting that access for that object. So you can see that they have, the enterprise role here. So you'll be able to see the role or roles that are giving the user that access. So not only are you looking at where users have access, but how they're getting that access. So the user access report is a very verbose way to show that. One of the things that we kind of strive for and tell our customers is that your auditor wants to know where high-risk areas in your system are and who has access to those high-risk areas. So we have an idea called critical access, where you can actually show exactly that. You're going to be able to come in and instead of looking through the entire list of user access, you're going to be able to pinpoint areas in your system where they're considered high risk. You'll be able to build up those critical access groups, which are basically just combinations of accesses that you can put together. And then if you go ahead and run this report, what this is actually doing is showing you users that have access to those different areas. So you can build, a critical access group around financials, or if you want to even break down further and say around, purchasing or HR or whatever you would like, you can build those areas and then be able to run these reports very quickly and show where users have access. So just like before, when we click on these these rows here, we're going to be able to see not only where the users have access, but how they're getting that access. You're going to be able to see the role that access is coming from. So you're seeing the same data that you would be able to see from user access, but you're seeing a much more pinpointed report to be able to give to your auditor or show very quickly, who has access to those areas. The two reports that we have shown so far have been around user access. If we go ahead and switch over, we also have the same kind of reporting for roles. So you can actually come in here and select a role and be able to run that same report. So not only, so you'll be able to see that this role has access to this object within Intacct at this level. So not only can we show the user access, we're able to show role access. You'll be able to run these and show, if you were to assign the AP clerk role to a user, what access are they going to get? So you can come in and see that very quickly here from that aspect. So that's kind of defines the access reviews portion. We're showing where users are having access. If we move on to the segregation of duties, what this is actually showing, if we come in here and run a rule set, is where segregation of duties exists within your environment. So when you purchase a Fastpath tool, you get an out-of-the-box rule set from us that basically our internal audit team has went in and said, if you have access to these two processes within Intacct, that's considered a conflict. So you have 265 different rules out of the box. This rule set is completely customizable for your environment. You can add to it, remove from it, do whatever you need to do to make it yours. But basically the way to read this is that if somebody has access to the accounts object within Intacct and journal entries at above a view level, that can be considered a conflict. So you get the conflict name, the description of the conflict, maintain fictitious accounts and create erroneous postings. Basically, that they could create an account and then post a journal entry to that account. So obviously that's going to be a conflict. You can set a risk level for it, so you can designate which conflicts are high, medium, or low risk, and then so you have this listing out of the box here. Obviously, the next step is to say, well, where do users and roles have these conflicts at? So if we come up to user conflicts, that's exactly what we're going to be able to see. If we go ahead and run this report, what we're actually looking at here is we've taken user access and run that against our rule set, and it's going to show us where users have those conflicts at. So you'll be able to see Jimmy Admin here has above view access to class and allocations. You can see the description of the conflict here, the risk level, the company that they have that conflict in, and then the role or roles that are giving them access to those objects. The status column here, you'll notice that most of them are set to new. This is basically your mitigation, right? So you basically have two options when you're looking at user conflicts. You can either change the security within Intacct itself to remove the conflict, or you can go in and set a control for the conflict itself. So the status is basically, if we go ahead and click on this, it's going to bring up our mitigate conflict window. So we're going to be able to actually mitigate that conflict in place through the app here. So we can go in and set the mitigation type and a status. We'll go ahead and mitigate that conflict. And you'll notice that that has changed now from new to further review. So you're going to be able to keep a record of all of your mitigations in the Fastpath application. So not only is it allowing you to see where the conflicts occur, but it's also allowing you to mitigate that conflict and keep a record of that conflict going forward, or the mitigation going forward. So you can do all of your mitigation inside the app here and report on that. We also have the conflict status report here, so you'll be able to come down here. This is the status of all of your current mitigations that you've went through in your environment. So you'll be able to come down here and export this report, give it to your auditor, and show here are the current mitigations that we currently have in our environment going forward. So you're basically, as long as you've been doing your due diligence, you can export this report, hand it to them, and they should be good to go. So not only do we have user conflicts, but we also have role conflicts. So we can actually go up here and run this report. Go ahead and run this for both. So what we're actually doing there is we're taking the access of the role or roles that you select, and we're running them against a conflict rule set again. So you're going to be able to come up here, and you can run this for individual roles, or you can run it for multiple roles, and we're going to be looking at the access from both of those roles together, what conflict would be assigned. So you can use this as a modeling template, right? So you can see what would happen if I add this role to user, what additional conflicts are going to be assigned, or you can use it as just looking at the roles themselves and showing the conflicts there. We also have the individual role conflict report, which is going to go through and run each of those roles individually and show you the conflicts that are inherent to those roles by themselves. So you can quickly go through and see all of the conflicts per role that would be that are inherent to the access that the role has. So all the reports that I've shown today, you can export to PDF or Excel. You can schedule to be sent to an email address, and basically make these reports be yours. So I'll actually go ahead and hand this back to Zayshawn now. That's basically all I had for the Fastpath demo.
Thank you, Alex, and I think that's a fantastic. I think just from a point of view of kind of summing it up in a way is making sure that we are looking at the controls that we talked about and what automation we're looking at in that regard. So it's an important aspect that we just talked about is manual controls, automated controls, and in automated controls they've got configuration settings, SOD controls, security settings, and all the details we talk about. And some of these are actually inherent in Intacct, and SOD, especially security and SOD, may be more something that we need to look at as a tool, as a Fastpath tool here. So, I mean, we can go on and talk a little bit more about it in this regard, but we only had about an hour here. So we sincerely, at least Alex and I sincerely appreciate your time, and we look forward to having questions. And as you can see, we will probably give this out a presentation in the format of an email to all the folks that are available, and the webinar is being recorded as well to actually talk about. But here's my contact details and Alex's details. So if anybody has any questions, we'd be more than happy to talk and entertain that as well. But if there are any questions, we'll go from there. James, we'll take it over. Give it back to you.
It doesn't look like we have any questions. Hopefully that means you guys did a great job just explaining everything. Again, as Zishan said, we recorded everything, so we'll be sending out the recording in case you missed something, and you can share that with anybody you feel necessary. Otherwise, thanks for coming out and enjoying our webinar, and we hope to hear from you soon.
All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Alex. Thanks, James.
Thank you, Zishan. Thanks, Alex.